So it looks like they're giving us a hint that we should stop chit-chatting and start the webinar. So we have Terry, who has PhD in education, MBA, BS in Bachelor of Science in Marketing and Management. So quite a Renaissance man there. And then Michelle, quite a Renaissance man himself. He has a BA in psychology. He's a master's candidate in counseling psychology and a graduating medical doctor. To me, that was
Wow.
fascinating.
Yes.
This is what I wanted to do when I grow up. I have a degree in psychology, but I also wanted to be a medical doctor, but life had other plans. But so two experts in research for all of this, for all of these degrees, you have to do a lot of research, and anyone who's ever written a doctorate knows that there is no research like research for a PhD. So
Oh,
as I
that is so
said,
true.
right? So we are really honored to have you here, and thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. I think we will start with Terry.
Yes.
So we will let you kick this off with a question of
Okay.
where to start research on important components. So
I
over to you,
love
Terry.
it. Thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, it's very interesting. That introduction doesn't do justice. I appreciate you so much. And I would love to, for the participants out there, students that might be with us this morning, the parents, let me get started with just a quick question before I go into it. In the chat box that we've opened up for you, share with us maybe what type of research you've done. What was it for? Was it for a science fair project, etc.? I would love to learn a little bit about you that is out there in the world with us today, right? I'm using that term broadly. So feel free to share that and we'll go through with the moderators and answer some of those questions. But what I'll do for the sake of time, because I do, believe it or not, teach, as I was mentioning to the group prior to us letting people in. And so I have classes that'll be starting up here in a few minutes with some high school students. But what I'll do is just a brief touch base on the process of research, where you could get started. If there's any information I don't get shared with you today, I want to let you know that we will have that information available after this webinar, excuse me. So I'll just start by, when you're looking to do research, one of the things you're going to be looking to do is looking for potentially local research projects, right? A lot of times research is based upon a passion or a project that happens based on something that's happened to you personally, okay? For example, I mentioned earlier today to the colleagues that I like looking at environmental science, right? Why? Because I'm passionate about our environment and how that works. So that's just an area. So one of the things I'm going to urge everyone to do is look for local research projects, things that excite you, whether it be where you live, whether it be internationally, just what gets you going, okay? Another piece is, well, how could I get involved with it? Or how do I learn more about it? Well, with your local research projects, if you want to learn more about it, you have obviously us through Ascend Now that can help you, but you could participate in summer camps and structured research projects. Those will help you learn to guide you and give you some tools to be able to understand more about the projects and that you're looking to research. But I really like to work with the students one-on-one, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to present today, to share how I can help you jump those hurdles, the proverbial hurdles that okay, because there might be some of you, oh, somebody said, I've recently been researching feudalism. Sorry, that caught me off guard there. And manorialism in medieval period in Europe. Wow, that's an interesting topic. So you have to excuse me. I had that tendency to jump off topic there, but I loved what was just shared there because that is a passion it's giving to that individual to want to research. But where do they go? So let's talk about that, starting that independent research. There are many different places you can go. If you look at the slide that we're sharing with you this morning, here's a couple of instances where if you were looking at medical or something you wanted to research, you could go look at things like PubMed, PubMed Central. A great place to look for research is Google Scholar. Okay. I know when I worked on my PhD, that was one of the primary areas that I looked at because it was just a major avenue and tool. And as you guys can hear, probably off in the distance, there was the school bell. So there's also what we call open access journals. So as you can see, we've shared with you, and this is just touching the base, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, if you were studying, again, medicine or something in that type of research, and the Public Library of Science. So those are just a few tidbits. So if we can move on to the next slide, that would be very beneficial to us, please. Okay. So when you're talking about your research strategy, there are a couple things I want you to think about. I really want you to consider your query, okay? What you are researching. That is going to be very important to you, okay? What does that mean? Okay, again, if we're looking at the young individual who shared in the chat box about feudalism and manorialism, one of the things, there are two keywords right there they can use in a Google search to help start finding some research information. Why do I say that? Well, as you know, we can type full sentences in Google. We can type full sentences in any kind of different websites that we want to find. We need to remove words. We need to condense it. We need to find keywords. Okay. Keywords help. And so if I was looking at, for example, a student I recently worked with on solar and economics, and in his or her country, I might look at impacts of solar on XYZ country and economic impact. Still seems like a lot of words, but I've narrowed it down. And the reason I want to narrow it down is I want to make my search easier. Remember, Google thinks like this. It's quick. It's going to find you answers. Okay. It's become our everyday world. Let's utilize the technology that is there. Okay. Now, we also want to specify and professionalize the information that we are using, right? So that's all very, very important. All right. So what do we mean by that? That means brainstorming with individuals, whether it be professionals like, again, the individuals that are leading today's presentation, myself, anyone, okay? Professors, teachers, librarians, okay? So you're going to list your findings, okay? You can customize your searches, etc. Okay? So those are just a few ways. Now, can we go ahead and go on to the next slide? It's very funny, everyone. While I'm presenting to you, you should see the students looking at me like, what is this guy doing right now this morning? I love it, right? So I love students. So one of the things you're going to want to look at is how do you Google more efficiently? Okay. You know, what's your search structure look like when you're doing Google? I just kind of talked about it with your keywords. What are some of the community forums? What are some of the search helps you can use, right? There are all kinds of different resources that you guys can utilize to help you. Keep your search simple, okay? So that's a key. Keep it simple, okay? Think about how the page you're looking for will be written, which I'm not going to have time to go into it today, but one of the things I wanted to cover, which I would love to offline with some of you guys if you would like to, is the setup and structure of the paper, okay? That's very important. Actually, I may not get to talk about that today, but some of my colleagues will. Okay, they can take over that for me while I'm working with my students here locally. Okay, you want to describe what you need within as few terms as possible. I already hit that, so I don't need to belabor that point. And choose what we call descriptive words, okay, that are going to find you the information you're looking for. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So we have a colleague Michelle, who's going to be talking about the bibliography, references, citing and such. So I'm not going to jump into that because I know he's got an excellent presentation and he's going to be discussing that in greater detail. So I will let him go ahead and cover that with you this morning and giving you some guides on that. But this is very important for your research and giving credit to the persons that actually wrote papers that you're using with your research. Okay, very important. I tell my K through 12 students, as well as my MBA students that I teach, all about this. And I think it's very important to give credit where credit's due, because we as researchers, we want credit for what we did, the work that we did. Okay, so if we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to put everybody on mute real quick. Let me just tell my students one thing and I'll be right there. And Michelle, if you'd like to maybe quickly jump in about that, I know you bring that in more detail, but if you wanted to share something with them when I talk to my students, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Going back to the bibliography, and we'll talk more about citations, but the idea of giving credit, because imagine a world where we live with no one giving any other one credit for what they actually did. So not only research, but like having credit for your role in the project, in a group project or a group presentation or whatever group work you did. It's just that it's an unimaginable world, right? Like you have to have credit, you have to give others credit for it to be more rewarding, more reinforcing for them to sustain the effort they actually do. And we'll talk more about how citations are made, just some samples of them. But an important notice here between a bibliography and citation, or the references page, is that bibliography is all resources you consulted, even if you haven't used them particularly in the research. So like it doesn't have to like be a sentence from that work. It's just that it gave you background, it gave you context that allowed you to search for more citations. This is the one difference between bibliography and citations. And Maria, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, actually, I was going to ask you, so yeah, we love getting credit, giving credit, but isn't it also, if I don't give credit in my paper, isn't that also plagiarism? If I write a research paper and I don't give credit to every source that I use, couldn't I get in trouble for plagiarism?
That's a really important question out there, and we'll discuss it at more length. And we'll add even more complex layers, like what happens if I took an info and I didn't know that other people did that or said that, or what happens with the modern technology out there, like all the AI generating machines and AI generating websites. So that's a really important question. But I'll put that towards the end. So yeah, Terry, I think you can go ahead now.
Yeah, no, that's great that you said that, because somebody put that in the Q&A actually for us, Michelle, that they were talking about how is AI affecting research. And I know that that is something you're going to be covering, which I'm actually exciting. And I know we talked about that offline yesterday. So can't wait for you to be able to share that information. Yeah, I'll just finish up a couple more things if we can move a couple of the slides ahead for me here. And talking about stats. What do you mean by stats? So obviously statistics, data. When you do research, it's obviously important to share data to support and back up your research. Well, what does that mean though? Okay, or where can I go to get that? Well, I'm sharing just a few examples of where you can get that. So we've got a place that's called like the Pew Research Center. You know, that is just one area. It is, of course, an authoritarian source on the evolution of the internet and surveys. That's just an example, but there's data that's included in there. Okay. There's databases. Yes, you can move ahead. That's fine. There's databases that are available that you can use to find numerical value to support you. Now, when you're looking at your research articles, when you're doing that research, you're going to find that a lot of the studies already have some data there for you. Okay. Data is visually appealing. It gives factual support to your research and what you're doing. So it's important to use data. again, obviously, I could do a whole separate presentation on just the importance of data. But for today's purposes, and out of respect for my colleague, Michelle, and the others here, I'm not going to dive into that, but I do want you to know that I can help you with, or we can help you with finding different areas of looking at those databases and finding what works for your study. It's important to find the databases that work for your study, okay? And just remember that what I'm sharing today is just for specific types sometimes, okay? And primarily for the US. So if we're looking at an international study for you, some of these databases may not help you, but they are important for you to use, okay? If we could go ahead. Okay. Excuse me one second. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So as far as international resources, again, I just talked about that. That's going to be important for you to be able to find. Okay, so I shared a couple of those with you. So my colleagues, I unfortunately will have to put myself on mute. I'm going to be here, but I am going to have to put myself on mute so I can give attention to my students. Would one of you mind, I know you saw the presentation I prepared about the research setup. If you wouldn't mind maybe taking over and helping out a little bit with that, that could be very helpful to me.
So Michelle, I'll let you take over from here. I just wanted to point out that Terry is US based, so most of the resources that he's providing are US based. Locally, I think that once you live somewhere locally, you're more aware of the local resources that are available, the statistics. For example, my students tell me where they find the data for Indonesia and stuff. I don't know because I'm also US based and I'm also in Europe. So I know those local resources. So just because a resource is not listed or it's US based, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. You are able to find it by Googling. You get to find the data for your specific region. So with that, Michelle, I will let you take over.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. And just to add to your point is that the more you do research in one area, you get to know the international databases for it too. So for us, like for more psychology, PsycInfo is like a huge resource that we got to utilize over and over again. So not only your local resources, but also international resources regarding the area of your research. So thank you for pointing that out.
I'll let you take over.
Okay. So now we go more to organizing a research. So how is it structured? And by that, we won't go so much in detail, but it's really important to lay out the steps through which you go actually and establish your research. Can you move? Yeah. So the very first step is pre-read. And why is it called pre-reading? Literally there isn't something called pre-reading because it's technically reading, but pre-reading is basically you immerse yourself in knowing what's out there. So if you're doing research on obedience, for instance, and you've no idea where the literature or where other researchers are currently standing here in regard to obedience research. So you just do a pre-reading, you do skim through different resources, skim through different studies, get to know the databases, get to know the original papers and reviews and meta-analyses, which are all types of research and which are all very useful to know what's out there. And this relates to the bibliography part. So every influential source you're going to find, you need to keep record of that, right? So just don't ignore the resources you find, just don't delete the files, just don't delete the history, because you really need to keep record of that. And we'll get to know that because it tells the reader how far you've researched about your topic, right? If we have a bibliography of 50 or 100 resources, it's different than a bibliography of 5 or 6 resources. So it tells us about the more of the how knowledgeable you are in the area. Second, you go to research your end product. So you now have more focused understanding. You know where the obedience research stands in. You know what debates are currently being heated or being brought up. You know what research gaps are there. Now this is, you identified your end product, your point of starting your actual research, because you don't want to do something, you don't want to research something that other people have done over and over again across history, right? Like, I don't want to do a research and come up with a finding that has been already proved 50 years ago. So this is why the pre-reading is important, and this is where you go on and establish your starting point. Second, you do a concept map, and this is extremely important in organizing your research, because you originally, like, for instance, I might have an idea about obedience, that we tend to obey authorities, for instance. But now, as long as I'm reading, there will be a lot of thoughts and a lot of sometimes similar, a lot dissimilar and contrasting thoughts. And sometimes thoughts will be relating to each other, but not quite similar or dissimilar. So you need to lay out the thoughts you get, the ideas you get, and research findings, the case studies, the experiments done, the data, as Terry said. You need to lay them out for you to be able to know how you're connecting them for the reader. And we'll speak about that part of synthesis later. But again, concepts are extremely important. And for any one of you who has done research before, it's basically the hardest step in the research. The writing itself is not, it's not a big deal. So it's about how you know what you're actually writing. Then you get to have the research plan, the journal plan. I think we can get to the next slide, please. One very useful tip I've been told before is that to write my original idea somewhere before I actually read anything. Because as you're reading a lot of resources and as you're integrating different opinions, you may lose that your own voice, your own words, and starting writing, like you start writing actually with the author's voice. So this is a really good, important tip, that you need to write in your own words. And you really need to put a lot of effort in convincing and persuading the reader of why are the sources you're actually citing are important. Why is this type of data is important? And why actually your idea of research, like why is it that you're addressing, what you're addressing is actually relevant and important? And the second thing is very self-evident, very obvious, is that you guys really need to save your research. You really need to kind of, the resources you got, the journals, the papers, the book chapters you've read, the data you have, you really need to save that somewhere. And there are a lot of kind of easy applications that do that. But again, at some points you need to do them manually. At some points, for more extensive research, you need to do some kind of color coding, or just organizing the information in a way that will help you recall and relay these information. And lastly, and my personal opinion, which is like the easiest part, is actually writing. If you have all of your thoughts laid out, and if you have your relations and comparisons and contrasting all set and all ready, then you only start writing when you're ready. I think we can go to the next slide. Yes, now comes a very important part, which is, how can I know that the information I'm gathering is reliable? And to start with is the definition of reliable. And one easy, simple definition is how you describe a reliable person. You describe them as trustworthy, as they fulfill their promises, they fulfill their appointments. Their word is actually, like, you can build on their word, you can depend on their word. And one important part is that they'll be trustworthy across time, and that relates to the reliability of the research itself. So reliable information is trustworthy information. It's information that you can trust, that has been used and reused in different researches, that other researchers, like a reliable experiment, for instance, is an experiment that other researchers can replicate. So they can trust to have the same results each time they replicate that. And what makes a source more reliable? How can you spot the reliability of the source? Is basically through a whole different factors, but some of them are, where is it published, right? There are a lot of reliable publishing journals. There are a lot of known journals that we know that these journals are top tier. They only publish things when they review and peer review the journals, so the papers. So that's one thing. The second thing, which will relate to our next couple of slides, is citations. So for each paper, you have an idea about how many other researchers have used this exact same paper in their research. And usually you want to lean more the papers that have been more used in different researches. So more citations, more in citations, and that will relate, like that will be present somewhere in the journal, somewhere in the where you'll find your paper, saying how many other researchers have cited this paper in their research. Publishing journals, citations, peer-reviewed papers, like there are journals that says that these journals are actually peer-reviewed, which means in simple terms that if I submitted a paper, Marie, which is my peer, will review my paper, and we have no connection whatsoever for her to judge my credibility, the validity of the studies, the reliability of my study, and how is actually this paper publishable. Marie, would you like to add something?
Oh, no, I was just, you actually said it. We don't know each other. Peer does not mean a friend, but another expert in the whatever you're researching. So your research peer, your expert peer. So,
Exactly. Thank you for clarifying that out.
but you actually
Is that-
said it. So
yeah. Yeah, we should, like, it's a must that we don't know each other, and it's to increase the objectivity of this judgment. Other credible resources are again relating to local research information resources are government reports. And this, of course, differs according to governments, according to official websites, according to what sorts of reports are being published, and also educational institutions. And a very quick tip to know what actually government and educational institutions websites are is basically websites ending with a .gov for government are government websites, or EDU are basically educational websites. .org refers to usually refers to a nonprofit organization, with some exceptions, but these are kind of general tips that you can look for while you're using the information from that resource. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. Now, very common questions, right? Like, what are some unreliable sources of information? So what about Wikipedia, blogs, posts, Facebook posts, anecdotal evidence, which is basically someone saying that from my experience, this and this happened, self-published resources. And the idea here is that it's not a yes or no question. So I cannot, like, it's not that you should never use these kind of information. That would be wrong. But again, using these kind of information, you need to know that they're not very reliable. So they're not extremely scientific. They're not peer reviewed. They've not been cited. Like, there's no way you can actually know how many other researchers have cited this piece of information. But they could be very useful in knowing what's popular out there. So what's being said in terms of maybe pop knowledge or popular sayings or popular cultural ideas or anything like narrative. For one area of research, which is narrative discourse analysis, they usually utilize these things. So you utilize blogs and self-published resources and Facebook posts and comments and everything. So they utilize them in the research. But again, you have to ask yourself, what is my research about, right? If it's about very scientific, very hardcore scientific ideas or phenomena, so you really need to stick to the more reliable sources. If it's something that you need to just know what's out there, to have a complementary information and not to base your whole research on information in these resources, then you're okay. Like most studies or in university, most of your assignments will have a limit of non-academic resources. So these fall under non-academic resources. And again, one compartment, and this is one, like, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but there are something called rhetorical appeals, like what kind of approaches or ideas that support your writing in general. And one of it's called ethos. And ethos relate to your credibility. So how credible you are, depending on what kind of information you're utilizing in your research. Yeah. And again, going back to the point I briefly talked about, you better give them credit, right? Because first of all, like think of a word without credit whatsoever. Like everyone does everything they do without anyone giving them back the credit they deserve. That will affect their sustainability. That will affect their integrity, the ethical component of the field. And think about it back to yourself, right? If you did a really, really hard work, spending months or years developing some sort of research, it will feel just awful if someone just stole this information from you and wrote it as if it's theirs in a couple of minutes, right? So again, like citations and giving them credit, giving the researchers credit can never be overemphasized. We can say that over and over and over again. You'll hear it like multiple and hundreds of times in your common courses, in your university, and your researching experience. So yeah. So now how can we give them credit? Giving researchers credit is basically citations. And citations is, we'll see a sample in the next slide, but before that, citations is basically mentioning all information relevant and enough for other people to know that this piece of information lies in this place. So again, back to Marie's question about plagiarism. What is plagiarism? Plagiarism is basically like this gentleman, not very gentleman in the picture, stealing something, right? So they're stealing information. They're writing something as if it's theirs. And in university, like when you guys go more in university experience, plagiarism is even sometimes in different courses counted if you used your own information, but twice. Like for instance, if you submitted a paper in a sociology course this semester, and you're taking a philosophy course the next semester, and you thought they'll copy the same exact paper in this course, this is also called plagiarism. Because again, you're copying, unless the professor allows it, of course. But plagiarism is basically copying, duplicating, rephrasing, and yes, you can actually plagiarize yourself. And this is an extremely paradoxical information, seemingly paradoxical. But yeah, it makes sense because you're kind of stealing the grade, or like you're stealing the effort that you should have done more, like that the professor is expecting you to do, and for your own learning process as well. Again, aren't we allowed to rephrase? We're allowed to paraphrase, and there's a great difference. So rephrasing is just getting an idea from the paper and just flipping the words, flipping the arrangement, just switching simple meanings and basically saying the same thing. But paraphrasing is a more complicated process, right? So it involves a better understanding of the piece you're reading, and more preferably an understanding of the context and other relating information, and somehow you have to connect these together. So rephrasing is plagiarism. If you got to read the information, just rephrase it very simply, very superficially, and rewrote it again, this is plagiarism too. And thank you, Terry, and have a great day out there. Okay, so to cite or not to cite, I think the answer here is, of course, to cite, unless you really need to involve yourself in a serious ethical violation. And citing is not as strenuously hard as it seems. So there are a lot of citation platform, citation material out there that will help you in your process. Some of them are just, they're not all extremely accurate, so you'll have to revise for most, if not all of them, but they just do the hard work for you, and you knowing the rules, knowing how you do it, you just edit some stuff and that's it. And the rules may strike you first as difficult to remember or complicated, but believe me, like it will take you only a few researchers, a few papers for you to get used to them and just do them subconsciously. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is like two samples of two of the most famous citation styles. And this is another term that we need to know, is that there are a lot of citation styles out there, citation schools or citation methods. One of them is MLA, and the other thing is APA. And depending on your research topic, your research area, where are you submitting this research, you'll know what type of sample you need to follow. So just very simple information in the citation. Like if you think of it, it seems like a lot, but it's really not. So first you write your author name with a specific order, like sometimes writing the last name first or the first name first, depending on the school. Second, you write the article title in which, or the book title that you got actually the information from. And then you write the journal title, because the article is published somewhere, right? So you write the journal title. Then the volume and issue of the journal, because if someone needs to locate this exact paper, you probably need to refer them accurately. And the year of the published article, because again, if you're using very recent information, you want to show that off, right? So your paper is very credible and it's very reliable because you're using very recent information, or quite like, again, depending on your research. If you want to prove that something has been going for so long, like so many long years, you'll probably want to mention that the paper is extremely old. You're also writing the pages that used in the journal of this article. And lastly, you're writing the database, what has been, like what Terry has been telling us about, the database in which the journal is based in, and the URL of the article, since you most probably found it online. Again, another example of the APA, that was what I was telling you about, is that it uses the author's name in writing the last name first, then the date when the article was published. And yes, thank you, Kiro, for pointing that out. Please, as long as like throughout the presentation, write whatever questions you have, and we'll get back to them after we finish. Back to the APA. First, yeah, if you can, yes, thank you. So author's name, date, article published, basically the same type of information like MLA, but with different format. Title of the article, title of the journal, volume and issue number again, page number, and the DOI, which is basically kind of the code of the paper for other people to easily find.
Michelle, a quick question about this. So if the citation style is not listed in the instructions, or, my professor doesn't tell me use this type of citation, does it matter? Can I choose the one I like? Are there any rules, or can I just choose the one that works best for me? Does it matter which type I cite, as long as I've cited?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the easy answer to that is just go ask the professor, but also it depends on the area of research, right? So APA stands for American Psychological Association. So if I'm doing a psychology research and I'm using the Linguists Association and ignoring the American Psychological Association method of research, that won't probably be a very good idea. So again, it goes back to what type of research I'm doing, what area of research I'm doing, and which kind of journal I'm publishing in. Again, the rules regulating all of that. But thank you for pointing that out. So,
right. So when in doubt, ask, right?
yeah, basically. So
thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so again, just to sum up, citation means that you're being academically honest, that your work is credible work, and how we know it's credible, because you're citing other people and preferably citing other credible resources as well. And the last thing is for tracking, for if someone is very interested in the area you've done and wants to build on it, and they could utilize the resources that you already managed to gather. And these are some tools for helping you with citations, as I told you. Needle tools, Mendeley, EasyBib, Zotero, and Zotero is a very common extension used in Google Docs, Word documents. It's a very useful tool to help you keep track of the resources. So it has like every resource you cite, like it's saved in Zotero, and it helps you go back to it in citation, whether within your paper or at the end of the paper, which we call like the work references page, or like the page where you list all of the references you cited within the paper. Can you go next, please? Now you've read your information, you've done your concept maps, you have your resources, you identified the research gap, you really know what information you have, and you've read them all. The part of writing is a good synthesis of information. And a really good question for you to reflect on is the difference between summary and synthesis, right? So if I read a lot of information and then I'm writing these information and relating to them and everything, isn't that summarizing of the information I read? Can you go to the next slide, please? And basically, the more deeply you read, the more deeply you involved yourself in the material, the more deeply and more thoroughly you understand the information you've read, the more able you write with. And this is basically a very useful visual tool for you to understand what synthesis is. So first you understand the material, right? So you know a piece of information, you try to make meaning of it, you investigate this piece of information and you investigate behind it, you see what other researchers have been saying about the same kind of concept or the same kind of information. You create your own understanding, you create your own context, you create your own relations, being this research says the same thing, or that it actually says something completely opposite to what I've just read. And then you're sharing and reflecting that. And synthesis is basically like a reflection, like integrating all these different parts of information, as well as your own personal input, right? So if you're just summarizing, we'll have no personal input. And one this is one simple way to think of. So summarizing, I can read the material, I can read the information without me deeply involved in any of the information, without constructing relations and contrasts and comparisons between these different research, and I just summarized it and put it in the paper. And yes, Marie, this is a really useful way to put it, is that summary is just basically putting it all together. But synthesis is putting it all together in a way that makes more meaning and that is additive to the research, additive to the area that you researched. So it's summary plus more reflections, more comparisons, more relations. So as in the slide, like you identify these contact points, points of contact in comparison and contrast, like where they agree, where they disagree, do they explain each other, do they reinforce each other? And then again, depending on the type of research you're saying, but for the most part, it requires a new thesis or a new idea or a new relation that is yours to come with. And one way to think about it is synthesis, like from the word synthesis. So it's just like a thesis and antithesis. You're combining them together and creating something new. And again, some sorts of papers, some sort of research will only compose of some parts of that. But for the most part, you really need to do that. You really need to have this addition of yours. Any more questions? Okay, so just to sum up, some very quick tips for you to avoid or try out. So things to avoid is that don't make the whole of your paper or the majority of your paper constructed of other work. So it's really useful and it makes your work more credible if you have more citations, but not the whole of your paper or the majority of your paper to have just citations, right? I really need, as a reader, to know where your input is. Don't heavily rely on non-contextualized quotes, like hanging quotes in the beginning of the paper without much explanations, or uncontextualized facts or information it's very confusing. And as Terry said, you need to make it simple. You need to be direct, be to the point, and be clear. Things you may try out and find helpful is start with a very well formulated thesis statement. And the thesis statement is basically telling me at the very end, spoiling the paper for me. So as like counterintuitive as it is, spoiling the paper may be a very good thing to do. Just telling me as a reader what I may expect in your paper in the very beginning. So very clear, very direct thesis statement, very like statement of what you're thinking, what is the idea that you're trying to prove, what is that you're arguing for in the very beginning of the paper. End each paragraph with a link to the following one and start each paragraph with a topic sentence, meaning that each paragraph should end with a very basic introduction to the following paragraph. So all of your paragraphs make sense together. And each paragraph should start with a topic sentence, a sentence basically saying, what is the paragraph about? And again, if you're quoting an author, if you're citing a researcher, you may well try to tell the reader who that is. Of course, not a biography, but just who that researcher is. Again, it gives credibility. If you're saying, if you're quoting a Nobel Prize winner or a very established researcher in an area, you'd benefit from pointing that out instead of just writing the name or year of publication in the paper. Can we go next slide? Let's read an example together, and it's just very brief example of a really good synthesis. So it's saying that in the past, opponents of immigration raised economic, racial, religious, and nationalistic objections or questions about large-scale immigration to the United States. So it's giving some context, right, in the past. Today, however, experts tell us that opposition to immigration is expressed almost exclusively in economic terms. Now that's a different view, but in some way it relates to the first sentence. And then it goes and gives an example. And then in some economic vein, another like after like the number 41, in the same economic vein, Thomas Muller, an economist with the Urban Institute, again, introducing the researcher that you're quoting from, points out the widespread concern among Americans that the new immigrants use welfare and other public aid programs to such an extent, etc. Lastly, the last sentence, with these two reasons expressly conveyed, it's easy to see that most objections to immigration now fall under the economic realm. And this is a really good sentence, right? It brings everything that's been said in the paragraph together in a very clear and a very direct information given. Lastly, summarizing features of a good synthesis. So again, synthesis is like a summary with additional factors to it, with reflections, with comparisons, with personal input. So the good features of a good synthesis is accurately reports information from the sources. So you're accurately reporting the information. You're not messing with them. You're not falsely reporting information. You're actually organizing the information in a flow that will make sense for the reader. So if you've read if you read the information in a very chaotic and very disorganized way, which will probably be the case in all of your research, your effort will show in presenting them in a very orderly way, in a very good flow for the reader to make sense of them. And lastly, I've said that many, many times, the linking, the relation, the making sense of the sources together is of paramount significance for the reader's understanding of this paper and for it being actually a good research paper. So just not presenting the information, hanging quotes, or just facts, or just data, or just numbers. You really need to make sense of these as you go on the paper. I think we're done for the presentation part. And I'll be more than glad to get more questions, more comments, more concerns you have.
Well, I think we've already had a question, we've mentioned it about, and this is something that when Kira and I were talking was the very first question. What about artificial intelligence, Chat GPT? The question that we had by a member of the audience was, I started looking at AI tools for research instead of Google. Is this legal? And I think that Kira and I were more looking at it, can I use ChatGPT to write my research paper? So
Yeah.
would you
Welcome to
like
the
to,
future.
yes, would you like to address that? And I'm sure that Kira and I and others can also interact.
Yeah, yes, please. So this is a very interesting debate currently going, and um, basically, of course, like just to get over with it, of course it is some sort of plagiarism, right? Because again, you're copying information that is not yours, and you're presenting them as if they're yours. And so this is just the kind of the ethical part of it. So it is a kind of plagiarism. It is direct plagiarism because all rules of plagiarism, all concepts of plagiarism apply to that as well. The second thing is that, and I think Bri, you've shared that with us before, is that first of all, these platforms are not so developed, so they could easily be exposed by professors and teachers. Maybe not so easily, but again, like just the one reading of it will be enough. Can you still hear me clearly?
We can hear you. Your video's frozen, but we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, there you are.
Yes. So one thing, they could be spotted, and the second thing is that for our own benefit, there are counter AI spotting platforms now that just can very easily in one click check if that was AI generated. And I'd be
And
glad to hear your input in that as well.
yeah, do you know how that works? What it is that artificial intelligence or Chat GPT, what makes the program recognize that this was written by artificial intelligence? Something
I
as a
think
writing teacher, I tell my people all the time.
Yeah, I think it's for the same reasons you would spot it as well. There's just some incoherence out there. So very incoherent, sometimes even grammar. So incoherent grammar, incoherent sentence development. Um, um, and they can also trace some sentences back to the platforms it was given from. Like, yeah, so some of the old plagiarism spotting platforms, they just trace the sentence. They search all the internet of the same structure, the same sentence. And this is like the easy way to do it. But again, you're pointing out a very important part is that they're incoherence, right? So there's a vast difference between a humanly produced paper and an AI produced paper. So, yeah.
Right. And what about one of the things that I've played with artificial intelligence for my own purposes, and one of the big issues that I came across is that the accuracy of the information.
Yeah.
So as a human, when I do research, I check my sources. When I have artificial intelligence write my paper, it pulls the information that's available on internet, but it doesn't have the ability to decide whether or not this is accurate information. And so, you have artificial intelligence write your research paper and use random stuff that may not even be accurate. So I think
Yeah.
that for me is a big problem. But the
Yeah, I
question
agree.
that we had was actually quite specific. Is it legal to use it? Can you use artificial intelligence instead of Google? So instead of Googling, can you ask ChatGPT for, the same question?
I believe there are some useful actually uses of ChatGPT. So to use it, of course, it's 100% legal. So it can help direct, it can help give some context, it can help give ideas, give even creative ideas like designing ideas or anything. But again, there's a really thin line here between copying this information and placing it, presenting it as if it's yours, And as you said, like using it instead of Google, because we already all use Google. We, like Terry mentioned, Google Scholar is one of the most precious scholarly search platforms. So yeah, of course, and I think that poses the importance of actually teaching these good uses of ChatGPT, right? So instead of just banning it or saying that it's an awful tool or anything, we can have a conversation about the good ways through which we can utilize such a tool.
Responsible use of. And I would say that, as far as legality, it's legal, but I would say that at this point, until this is crystallized, that if somebody asked me that, I would say ask your professor or your research supervisor, because there are colleges now in the United States, I don't know worldwide, that are just banning it. They're blocking it until they figure out how to work with it. So, even though it is legal, if your professor says do not use it, that makes it illegal for your research.
Yes, very, very good point. Yes. And again, back to the, like, whenever confused, just ask, right? So whenever confused in this area, just ask.
Exactly. Kira, do you have any questions? I've been monopolizing this conversation.
No, not at all, Mary. So yeah, concerning Chat GPT, I felt that like it's okay, like Chat GPT could get the work done for you, but it's always better, and like you will feel the value of your work when you get it done yourself. And that's another like pleasure instead of just like having things done for you. But like, I mean, of course, everyone wants to like see the goodness of his own work coming out, and not just like an AI.
Uh-oh. We
Yeah,
we
really good
froze
point
you.
too. Yeah,
Yes.
true problem. But again,
Doing this instead. Shift to other.
You're
Yeah, so I also wanted to shift to other question that was asked by Rahma. She said that is paraphrasing also considered plagiarism? Like if you're like if you yeah, and I'm sure we tackled this but yeah, like if I wanted to add on this question. So for example, if I just got a piece out from the internet and then I paraphrased it and put it as it is. So is it plagiarism or like, and is plagiarism considered plagiarism when I forget to cite this? So for example, I paraphrased the piece out there, but I didn't like, I forgot to cite it, for example. So yeah, I wanna like know your take on this.
Mary, would you like to go ahead or should I?
actually, I was going to ask a similar question. I think forgetting to cite, I don't accept that as an excuse. You cannot forget to cite. If you researched it, you kept your bibliography, you forgot to cite, you've plagiarized. You did not give credit to somebody. With paraphrasing, I would say I consider paraphrasing a type of a summary. So I've read something and I'm just summarizing what I've read. It still needs to be in my bibliography. I might, if I'm taking a bunch of research and then I just paraphrase what others have said, as long as I've listed it in bibliography, it's okay, because summary is in a way type of a paraphrasing. If I'm paraphrasing a specific person, Carl Jung, I don't know why he comes to mind, I do need to give credit. It is, to me, if I'm grading a paper, if I'm peer reviewing a paper, and I see something that I recognize, because remember, I'm the expert in whatever I'm peer reviewing, I'm the expert. I will most likely recognize what you're talking about, and I will know you're paraphrasing somebody else's research without citing it. I will consider it, personally, I will consider it plagiarism. How about you, Michelle, sorry.
Yeah, it's basically the same answer because it's sometimes they call it in the like corrective committees an act of academic incompetence. So if you're forgetting like the very basic of giving people credit, and then you're probably in the wrong place. And again, back to paraphrasing, it goes back to the yeah, like generally, like Marie said, paraphrasing is basically a summary relating things together. But the depth of the summary is what will kind of decide whether it's plagiarism or not. So I've known cases of both. So I've known cases that just paraphrased and got a plagiarism case, and others that paraphrased, but the level of depth and the level of reflection and analysis present in the paraphrasing was enough to kind of prove their credibility and their authenticity in what they said.
That actually goes with the question I was going to say, like, what if in course of my research, I find something or make conclusions that somebody else has already, somebody else has already done this, but I didn't know. And for example, the websites that, I could find out from are blocked in my country. Some countries block certain websites. And so I do all this research and I come up with the findings and I write all of this, but somebody else has already done it and I don't know about it. Is it plagiarism? How do I prove that I didn't plagiarize, that this is my research? But you've kind of answered it in that the depth of my understanding will actually speak for itself.
Yes, exactly. The depth of the understanding, like if actually the website is blocked, this is something that people can test. So like if the resource is actually blocked, then it's blocked. And the depth of understanding, the depth of analysis, your personal input, the way you related different findings, different research findings also speaks for that. So yeah.
Right. And what if somebody else has done similar research to mine? Should I change the topic or can I still do the research and see what comes out?
This goes back to the pre-reading phase, right? Because if I'm writing about some area, I need to know what's out there in order, like from the very beginning, not to replicate other people's findings. And again, that goes back to I think Terry's point about you really need to be passionate about your findings, right? A good research paper has behind it a researcher who's genuinely interested to know the answer of some sort of question. So if you're not genuinely interested, if you already know the answer, then why care, right? Why care do a very good, thorough paper and someone else has already done that? So again, it's not plagiarism, right? So it's different, but it takes away from the readability of your paper. If the other person came away 5 or 10 years ago and said the exact same thing, then why would I read your paper, right? So,
well, I'll play a devil's advocate there. So maybe, I've read the paper, I've seen the research, but I don't agree. And I hope that by my own research, I will prove it otherwise. Let's say you and I both do culture, let's go back to basics. So psychology, let's say there's all these theories and research on attachment, on early childhood attachments, but we have our own, or I have my own ideas. So I do the same exact research, hoping to have a different outcome. Would that be something that's acceptable? Even if I come, if my research fails, then I write a paper about, well, no, I was wrong. The research actually supports the initial.
Yeah, I'd say that is one of the most credible papers that I'd love to read, because it shows how authentic you are and actually wanting to prove, like showing that you actually originally wanted to prove otherwise, but the experiment have gone the exact opposite of your liking, right? And you still wanted to report that, and you reported that honestly. And again, back to the interest in knowing the answer to a question, it's there, right? You genuinely wanted to know if there's a different answer than the one already given. So you acknowledge that. You acknowledge that one answer is already given, and you acknowledge that research has been done in this area, but my paper adds this new whatever to that area. So yeah, I really like that example. So
thank you. Kira, anything? I'm again taking over, so please.
No, Mary, feel free. So yeah, I was having other question. So cause like I've done my several research papers on my university and my thesis projects as well. But like many of those papers for me were a failure because I haven't like added an extra thing to the research. So like I didn't have an extra finding, for example. So yeah, my question here is that what's more important? Is it the methodology of my paper or is it the findings that I will have by the end of the paper? So do I particularly have to find something in order to write my research paper, or just I could research and if even if I didn't find a result at the end?
Would you like to take that on, Marie?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, because it goes back to Marie's point as well, right? So if someone read some research and they know the findings out there and they wanted to research the same area, so they wanted to do the exact same experiment and just check if they'll come up with a different finding. So they come up with the same finding that's out there, applying the same methodology of the experiment, and it still would be a very interesting research to read because it shows something new, right? It shows that this experiment that has been done 100 years ago still being done today with all of the variations in our time, done with the same methodology, it shows the same finding. So again, this is a finding of its own, right? So replicating something, replicating experiment, and proving that the findings have not changed. But coming to like theories or just explanations of something, that will probably be the wrong thing to do. If I'm just want to like if I just apply or say the exact same thing someone else said without any personal input, then it goes back to just you're choosing the wrong area. So your choice from the beginning is wrong.
And I would say that you mentioned methodology. Methodology is incredibly important, that you choose the correct methodology and that your methodology is sound. Because as a researcher, you can affect the final outcome, your finding, by choosing questionable methodology. So, we see that, for example, whenever I read any scientific papers or studies that affect our health, I check to see who sponsored the study.
Yes.
And because you can have a desired, for example, let's say a sugar industry, and they say sugar is really good for you. And a researcher can choose certain methodology and ways to get a desired outcome. So I think that as a peer reviewer, when I read the papers, I also check their methodology. So methodology is incredibly important. The finding is a result. It should be, you shouldn't go into research hoping to have this finding, to prove this thing. Obviously, you're trying to prove this thing or the other thing, but you shouldn't be married to that outcome. Your paper is just as sound if your finding is failed, basically. You prove yourself wrong. But methodology is incredibly important in that you got to that finding the correct way.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Like arguably, it's even more helpful to know if you failed in something. That shows that I should not basically attempt the same thing, right? So, yeah, very good point out there.
Yeah. So I also have other question, like so do I do I need to like be in a university or like have masters or PhD in order to publish a research paper, or or can I just like start publishing my own research paper and I'm a high school student, for example? So like, yeah, so is there like a certain age, for example, that is required to publish a paper, or like it merely depends on your effort and yeah. Um, so I'm not sure about this.
Yeah, absolutely not. So there's, of course, you can do research in high school, and there, as Terry mentioned, there are a lot of research projects. There are a lot of local research entities. You can be a research assistant of some researcher already doing the research, and then you can learn the experience from them. You can have your own research. So it just takes genuine interest in it, right? It just takes that you're really interested in learning this field, you're learning this skill, which is, I believe, as we progress, and especially more now, it's an indispensable skill, right? So you really need to have this skill as
Yeah.
a researcher, that you really need to know how are you finding information, what sort of information is that, how credible or reliable this is, how are you giving credit to people, how are you forming your conclusion, you're synthesizing different information. So yeah, no, absolutely not. You can do research. You don't have to be an MA or a university student or a PhD to
Yeah.
If I understood Kira correctly, he was asking also about being publishing your
Yeah.
research as a high school student or an undergrad, because for most part, when you look at, academic journals and scientific journals, they're all PhDs and
Yeah,
established
they are.
scientists. I don't think I've ever seen, and I read a lot of research, I don't think I've ever seen a high school student published in a scientific journal. Is that something that's even possible? Or
What do you think? I think that there's something behind that smile.
I know. I mean, everything is possible. It is just extremely unlikely that a high school student or even a college student that's undergrad, that's not, master's or a PhD student, that they will get published in a reputable journal. There are some journal. I mean, you can blog it basically, but for a reputable journal, there's definitely it's definitely difficult. I don't think it should ever stop people from researching and writing those research papers, but we are working to change that, aren't we? I want to, and there is actually, I've talked to a few people about it. There's so many young researchers that do such a great job that they should be published. They're ready to shake up that community of PhDs and established scientists with their work. So I think that in a very near future, that is about to change, a much nearer future than we think.
Yeah, and I think this is a good point also to mention the Journal of Ascend now. I think,
Yeah,
right?
definitely. Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. There are some journals that are dedicated maybe for undergraduate research, for again, just assisting some researcher or just getting the skills. Um, um, but yeah, I agree. It's just that the more, like, the earlier you start your research process, the more skills you gain, the easier it is when you're an undergrad or preferably MA or something, that the easier you'll be published. So it's just that it's a work you kind of prepare for it the right way. So
Well, since you insist, we have partnered with a journal that is actually specifically focusing on undergrad and teenage researchers. It is called The Lens. It should be available pretty soon. They're right now in the process of peer reviewing some amazing articles, but it's super exciting. And I would love to see all of our students, and actually all of the students everywhere, do research that's worthy of publication, because from what I understand, this journal is structured exactly the same way, with the same standards and everything as any scientific journal that you and I have published in the course of our PhD studies or afterwards. So same scrutiny, same everything, but except for asking for PhDs, they want young people to publish their original research that So I think that that's amazing. I don't know
Quite
what
exciting,
everybody
huh?
else thinks, but
Yeah.
It is
Very
definitely,
exciting.
yeah.
yeah. So let's see, do we have any more questions? Okay, well, I had a question. I had a quick question about Wikipedia. We've mentioned, and we always tell our students not to use Wikipedia as a source. And that's because that's also open source. Anybody can go in there and change and put whatever they want.
Yeah.
But is there a way to use Wikipedia? It's always the first thing that comes out when you Google something. Is there a way to use Wikipedia as a legitimate source for research?
There is, yeah, and I think one of the most useful uses for Wikipedia is the references they cite at the end of the page, right? So in Wikipedia, if you scroll down really down, so you get the references list, the sources, like whoever authors wrote that, assumingly did read these resources and cited from it. So the legitimate way to think of Wikipedia is it's like a shortcut to all of these resources. You go to the resources, you read them, and go with your own information. But again, using directly from the information typed in Wikipedia, it's not very credible because basically everyone can type in whatever they want. So, but the resources are very useful part of them. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that wraps it up for me. I don't think I have any more questions. I don't see any more questions from the audience. Kira, how about you? Do you have anything else to add?
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Michelle. It was really
Yeah, it's my
wonderful.
pleasure. My
Yeah,
pleasure.
and even though like it's been years since I revised my research writing processes, but yeah, thanks for rewinding this now, and yeah, we're eagerly hoping for all of our students and for to foster this culture of young research writers and yeah. Um, Thank you for your time and thanks, Terry. I know you left, but yeah, thanks for preparing this and thanks, Mary, for coordinating and for moderating the webinar and the talk. And yeah, it was wonderful, exciting, and actually, the recording for the webinar will be on our website, so we will like just drop the mail to those attendees and to everyone else who missed it, so that you could see it at your own time and just see the tips and tricks we've mentioned. And there is a lot more to discuss. I feel, and yeah, you can say this, but I feel this was just like a glimpse of of how to write a research, and it doesn't like entail all the tools and doesn't entail all everything required to write a research paper, but there is still yet to come and to discuss. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Kiro. Thank you, Marie. It was an honor being here. And yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Michelle.
Okay.
yes, and please, if any of the attendees have any questions regarding how to do a research paper, how to publish a research paper, please don't hesitate to contact us and to stay with us, and feel free to reach any of us out, either through mail, and we will all have a follow-up mail to this webinar. So feel free to reply even to this mail, even if you wanted help with your research. We can always assist you. And yeah, good luck everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day whenever you are.